I'm going to approve all of the AI agents that are joining us today. I make the same jokes at the top of every one of these events where we're just going to let them fight it out. But I have to work up some new AI material. Maybe I'll ask AI for the responses. Okay, we're at the top of the hour. As folks continue to trickle in, and for those of us who may be joining us by watching the stream on one of our social outlets, I'm Kevin. I'm the head of community for Sequence, and one of the things that I sort of feel like the drumbeat for me at the beginning of most of these conversations is how excited I am to have them. It's really true. Like, part of my weird job is that I occasionally get to corner thought leaders in a given space, and really excited to be joined today by Mike Metzger. We have been talking a lot lately about, what a weird time it is for small business in this country and how challenging it can be to navigate debt and scaling your business. And you talk about all of that in a really transparent and honest way, and even went so far as to document it. So when we started talking, when Mike and I'm going to speak about you in the third person for a second. When Mike and I first started talking about putting this conversation together, the thing that I was really drawn to was how open and honest you've been about the peaks and valleys of your journey, and the fact that, like, you've done a tremendous amount. We're absolutely going to talk about that, but you're still working on it. Quick housekeeping note, and then I would love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself, Mike, because I think you can do it better than I. If any of you guys have questions for Mike throughout, just drop them in the chat and we'll pick them up as we go. But anyway, yeah, Mike. First of all, welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I definitely appreciate it. And yeah, thanks to everybody tuning in.
It's going to be a fun and crazy informative chat. I have been binging a lot of your video stuff, so I may parrot some of that back to you. But it's like really such an interesting, relatable story, and I feel like you do a nice job of sort of sprinkling actionable, tactical things that you can do along with the sort of overarching insights. So we'll talk about that. But first, why don't we, for anybody who doesn't already isn't already familiar with your story, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you've done, and kind of what your background is?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a meme that I love, and I think it's of Will Ferrell. And it says at the bottom, it says, when you meet someone and they get straight to oversharing, and it's like Will Ferrell and what's his name from Step Brothers, and they're like high-fiving. And yeah, that's what today's going to be. I'm going to just tell you about me in a open, honest way and hope that you get some value from it. So I'll be 36 next month. I'll be 36 in June. I'm an entrepreneur. I run a branding agency, and it is ranked within the top 100 in the United States. Most of what we do is we build websites, we help people with social media and paid advertising, basically. And I got into this world not through college or any of the traditional means. It was because I loved art and I loved technology. And when you put those two things together, you basically get marketing. And I started off as a freelancer in my early 20s, just building little blogs and trying to help people put social media stuff together, had no idea what I was doing, and slowly but surely got better and started picking up bigger and bigger clients. And I do have a couple slides that, this isn't a presentation by any means. It's just sort of a casual conversation. But I do have some slides that I used for a different presentation that I just want to share with you so that um, you have some context. I'm not the greatest at like talking about myself, but here's a little bit about, who I am in a way. Let's see if we can, I don't know. Here, this works, right?
Yep, I can see it.
Cool. There we go. Can you guys see this?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm an author, I'm a speaker, and I'm an entrepreneur. I have an audience of about 250,000 people, and it's one of the reasons that I felt compelled to share my story with Not just success, but really the opposite side of that, which is failure and debt and failing to pay taxes and then trying to crawl my way out of the predicament that I had put myself in. But most people know me as a marketing consultant. I've had the fortune of working with some pretty amazing people. But on a personal level, I love business. I love marketing. At heart, I'm a writer and a storyteller. I love philosophy and ancient history. I'm a productivity junkie in many ways, which isn't always a good thing, but I love productivity and organization. I'm a perfectionist at heart, which also not a good thing. But I share my journey of overcoming perfectionism and a lot of those things. I'm a creative, so I love music. I love art. I also love being outdoors. I live in Richmond, like on the river. So I live in a river city. So I'm in the city, lots of cool things to do, great food and beer town. But I also live right on the river. So I do a lot of cycling, a lot of hiking, a lot of outdoor stuff, a lot of things on the river. I love to travel, love Formula One. And as somebody who's gone through a pretty wild and intense and difficult personal transformation really over the past decade, but specifically today, we're going to talk about the past couple of years. One of the most important things to me is fulfilling my human potential, and what I call kind of like self ascendancy, like self mastery. Surely we can't master ourselves entirely, but I care a lot about trying to maximize the potential that I feel that I have. And I'm also an advocate for others to do that as well. So here's an example of some of my clients. These might be potentially people that you might recognize or be familiar with. But these are all people that I've helped grow their audience, build their websites, help them launch their events, come up with their offer structures, their product ideas, social media campaigns, digital advertising, stuff like that. So everything I do is in the world of branding and content creation. And that's going to be a segue into kind of why I'm on this call today to share a little bit about my story with you. So those are just a couple slides to give you some context, give you some background of, what we're, who I am and who the conversation is with today. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. And maybe you mentioned this, but I didn't. It washed over me if you did. The videos that you've put out, like specifically talking about your story, have been viewed more than 700,000 times. So it's like clearly what you're talking about is resonating with some folks. And I think one of the reasons that I thought it was a sort of whatever the video version of a page turner is, was that you were really clear about, like, you kind of got to this place where you're like, oh, this is the bottom. I need to sort of figure out a way to reframe the way that I look at the world. And so you had an aha moment. Can you touch on that for folks who maybe haven't seen the videos yet?
Yeah, very much so. So the piece that, right, you've seen the glitzy, pretty side of things. Um, and I've had a lot of success. I made my first $1 million at about 31 years old. And like I mentioned, I'll be 36 next month. In 2021, well, let me start here and then we'll kind of reverse engineer things. So in 2024, I openly, publicly documented my income and my debt through social media. So I came out and announced to the world that I had racked up $247,000 in owed taxes and just past due debts. And there's a lot that led me to the point to where I consider, to make the decision to like publicly state that. And again, I've got 200,000 something people that follow me. So it was a very thought out decision of like, do I say something about this? And the more I thought about it, the more that I thought it was a good idea. And the reason I felt it was a good idea was because A, it would hold me accountable to fix my situation if I knew that people were watching my journey. And also, I knew that it would help other people. Now, at the time, I had no idea to what extent it would help other people. But that is the situation that led me to, documenting this and, eventually becoming friends with the people at Sequence. And some of you may have even seen me in some of the Sequence advertisements and stuff. And maybe that's how you discovered Sequence. So this is why I, started sharing my story a little bit. And so what I did was every month I gave a full breakdown of my income. I stated how much money I made, how far I had either fallen away from paying off my debt or actually, chipping away at paying off my debt, and documented the ups and downs and what I was experimenting with, what I was trying to do to get out of this situation. And in hindsight, it's easy to talk about it, but in the process, it was, I mean, easily one of the most difficult years up and down in my life because I was getting lien notices for my house. So the house that I lived in was, or that I do live in, this house right here that you can see in the background was in jeopardy. I was getting messages about my house being put on a lien. There were a few times that my bank account got garnished, so I couldn't, luckily I have multiple bank accounts, but they garnished my wages and froze my bank account and took all the money out of it. The IRS, that is. So these are, they're not only difficult things to just deal with in everyday life, but then I'm also having to get over my own stresses to then talk about these things publicly. And it made for an interesting personal experience, but it also it taught me a lot in the process. So that's what I spent my 2024 doing, was just publicly documenting my journey out of it. Um, so yeah, it's a little bit of context.
Well, you also said like so if we're the rest of us are hearing this and we're thinking about our own situation, whatever that may be, one of the things that you said that stuck with me was the idea that people should love rock bottom. And I think that sounds like it's counterintuitive. So can you explain, like, so if you're out there and you're trying to figure out, like, okay, it feels like I'm on a weird trajectory and this is not where I want to be, like, what was your aha moment there?
Yeah, 1,000%. You know, the harsh truth is, if we're here today and we're sitting on Zoom, you don't have it that bad. I've spent a lot of time traveling, and it shifts our perspective pretty significantly. I've spent a month in the jungle in the Dominican Republic. I spent a month living in Africa. And when you see like real struggle, it really changes the perspective of what is actually difficult in your life. And even at the end of 2023, when I was kind of going through my finances and assessing the damage that I had created in my own life, it was overwhelming and it was much more significant of a problem than I had originally thought. But I always felt confident that I could figure it out. And that's been the one constant throughout my life, is that, I'll figure it out. I'll know what to do. The path will become clearer as I start to traverse down it. And that was true, that was true for this, and it's true for many things. And I've really found a love for adversity in general. And there's kind of two ways to think about it. We have what's called an internal locus of control or an external locus of control. And an internal locus of control is when people say, life is happening to me, right? I am a circumstance of the things around me. And I just have always pushed that line of thinking away, and I've just never accepted that. And I've always adopted what's called an external locus of control, which is I am in control of my circumstances. The decisions that I make and my thoughts and what I believe are what determine my environment, my results, and the things around me. And it's how I got into this situation, is by my own actions. And it was also going to be how I got out of it. And so far, that's been true. So I'm not completely out of the hole. But in about the past 16 months or so, I've paid off about $100,000 of that $247,000 in debt. And things have significantly turned around. And for the most part, my businesses are back on track and even better than before. So it'll take some continuing time to chip away at some of these debts and stuff. But the great thing about Sequence is that I can just kind of plug that in, and I don't have to, let it consume my mind all the time. I know that I have a system there that is always helping me contribute to the things that I need to take care of, especially financially. So, but when I say
Cool.
rock bottom is a great thing, it really just means that when you're backed into a corner, when you're up against the wall, you either have the choice to let it consume you and just kind of give up or say, oh, there's nothing I can do about this, Or you can use it as a launch pad and say, okay, well, there's nothing to lose here. I could easily just continue to let it get worse, or I can find a way to make a decision to take massive action and turn this around and, find a level in my life that maybe I haven't been to yet. And I think many people that are suffering from you know, chaos in their own life is because they just haven't made that decision yet. They're just continuing to accept, little annoyances or setbacks or little problems, and they just haven't decided for themselves, okay, I don't accept this situation, and I'm going to do everything in my power to educate myself and push myself to change my circumstance. And I just think people should live by this. And there's so many historical reference that point to this, um, the obstacle is the way, right? And uh, you know, your mess is your message. And as you travel down the path becomes more clear, right? The light at the end of the tunnel. There's so many different references to this being true.
Well, let me ask you. Let's take that idea and extrapolate it a little bit because you mentioned chaos, and obviously, like chaos can kind of manifest itself in a lot of different ways, contingent upon where it is that you find comfort, what it is like the big thing that you maybe don't want to acknowledge that you're trying to figure out. But you did talk about along the way, like you noticed warning signs. And so, if I'm looking at my own situation, or if one of our folks who's sitting in or watching this conversation is navel gazing a little bit, like how do you determine what those like what warning signs would you be looking for?
Yeah. So anybody watching might be thinking like, what happened? How do you end up 250 grand in debt? And the first part is, and by no means is it an excuse. Um, and plenty of people may have this in common, right? Like I was never really taught any good financial habits at a young age. I was always just totally winging it. And a lot of the problems that I've had to overcome in the past couple of years in dealing with this financial situation have all been based on learning as I go. And originally, I never had that approach. Originally, I always thought these are things for future Mike to deal with. And put it this way. In January of 2022, that month alone, I had made $111,899. So almost $112,000 for the month of January 2022. So like at minimum, I was making $50,000, $60,000 a month, at maximum over 100 grand a month. So money like just wasn't an issue. No matter what the bill was, I'd never really thought about it much. I just didn't care because I always thought, okay, this will last forever. Because as a kid, I didn't have money like that. And I, didn't really have I never had a mentor. I didn't have people around me that made money like that. So I didn't know what the warning signs would be. I had no clue, and you hear this very basic fundamental advice of like have an emergency fund and like don't run high balances and don't have high interest debt. And like I maybe subconsciously had heard those things before, but definitely didn't put them into practice. And again, I just always thought this is for future Mike to deal with. Like, oh, I'll set aside some time later and I'll take care of taxes, or I'll set aside some time later and figure out, some sort of strategy for credit and gaining credit card points and how I'll then pay off my balance. And it just always felt like I'll do this when I have the time and I'll be making millions of dollars forever and I'll just deal with this later. No problem. And of course, life doesn't work that way. And the reality of what happened for me is this. I had bad habits already that I was blind to. So I didn't know that I was making these mistakes, even in the, what do you call it, late 2010s, right? So call it 2016 through 2019. I'm crushing it. I'm making money. I'm being invited to speak on stage. I publish a book, sell thousands of copies of books, and money's just coming in. And externally, all the people in my life thought I had just like the perfect life. I was in a relationship that lasted almost 9 years. Um, and I had a great career and I had gotten my health together. I was traveling the world. I was growing an audience on social media. So from the outside looking in, everybody thought like, oh man, that guy's a rock star, like he's doing great. Like what a great life. And in many ways it seemed that way. And in 2021, I was a bit blindsided by a handful of things, but it all started from losing my relationship. So, my relationship with someone who had been there from the very beginning of me getting my life together and had, grown alongside of me throughout my entire journey, we split ways. And it threw my life off course in a pretty significant way. And when you're making a large amount of income like that, like money just becomes such an insignificant thing. And losing my relationship and like the structure of my life became the primary, focus of everything in my life. And I found myself questioning, like, what am I doing? I don't even know if I care about this business or my marketing and my clients. Like, I just didn't, to be frank, I just didn't give a shit. I didn't care because it just wasn't important. And I had a team, I had a staff, I had a right-hand person that, in many ways was responsible for taking care of things. But the reality was that the leader of the business had taken, which is me, had taken their foot off the gas and wasn't present. And I wasn't showing up anymore because, and this is true, which is I was 32 years old when this started to happen. And I can honestly say I had never, ever experienced depression a single day in my life. I had always been the person that just sort of stiff-armed my way through life and things just worked out and almost had a very like arrogant, pig-headed approach to things, which many times worked out, just kind of bullied my way into getting the results out of my life that I wanted. But you can't, things don't always go your way. And I learned that the hard way. And it was like for the first time, something that was out of my control, in some ways, of course, happened to me, and I didn't know what to do about it. And it kind of spiraled into this time period where I was questioning, like, I don't even know what my hobbies are. I don't know who I am. I don't know what I'm doing. And, as going into my mid 30s, just kind of being like a solo dude, just spending his time alone, thinking about like, what is my path in life? What is my trajectory? Do I care about this business? What am I doing? And I lost myself for quite some time. And that is how this financial situation, or part of how it got significantly more out of control. It was somewhat contained leading up to like 2021, and maybe it wouldn't have gotten so crazy, but I did. I kind of spiraled into depression, which meant that I was just going out, staying up late, drinking, partying, like just going crazy and just wasting money and numbing myself through food and drink and retail therapy because I had the money. And it just felt like, all right, well, if it's in the account, no big deal. And when you're making, tens of thousands, if not more per month, it just never seems significant. What you're spending doesn't feel like it matters in many ways. And of course, that is a devastating habit, and it wrecked my finances. And by the time I realized it, it was a bit too late. So that is how I ended up in a situation where I kind of did an autopsy of my finances at the end of 2023 when I kind of poked my head out of the sand to say, oh, what's going on up here? And what was going on was like pure disaster. And so I did an autopsy of my finances, realized that the debt that I thought I had accrued was actually like probably 10 times more than I thought it was. And it really like shocked me cold back into reality. And I was like, wow, okay, I've imploded my life and I need to figure this out immediately. And that kind of brings us to the end of 2023, which was when I decided to kind of document my journey. I came across Sequence, started paying off debt, getting things in order, and, not only paying off a large amount of debt, but also getting my income sources back together as well.
So I want to ask you about that. So, and thanks for the plug. Like, not specifically about sequence, but you talk a little bit about making like accountability is a big part of what you've done, and it feels like a big part of your journey. And the idea of tying your progress to a promise that you couldn't back out of. So, in this case, like, this is kind of a two-part question, right? So, one is like talk a little bit about that, but also can you touch on like if I'm in a situation where I'm trying to claw my way out of something or figure out what the path is, how do I go about determining what how can I create an accountability opportunity for myself?
Yes. So you guys have full permission to laugh at me for this one. So it's sort of a funny story. Um, my my decision was to eat a handful of mushrooms, if I'm just being totally honest. Um, like I was just losing my mind, and one afternoon I decided to eat a big handful of mushrooms, and I had this crazy idea, and I was like, what if I just posted about this and just like said, like, yeah, I kind of like d imploded my life, created all this debt and made a video about it. Now, I was a content creator far before this happened. So I guess somewhere in my creative brain, I thought, oh, this is a good idea. And during that afternoon, I had actually made a voice note in my phone about this idea. And I had thought, you know what? What would be the pros and cons of doing this? Like, worst thing would be, oh, people would judge me and think I'm an idiot. And like, yeah, they would judge me and think I'm a dummy. And I said, okay, well, that probably wouldn't be fun, but what would be the pros of doing this? And I had a lot of ideas. And I thought, okay, number one, it would help other people that might be struggling with the same thing. Number two, like it would continue to like spread a message. It would give me a project to work on. It would get me more acclimated to doing the things I had been telling myself I wanted to do for years, which is be more consistent with my content. And I mean, that's my world because I'm in marketing and I'm a content creator. And I just wanted to find a way to become more comfortable speaking to camera, sharing my story, documenting my daily life, and using that as a tool to help other people. And oddly enough, this situation gave me a reason to do that. And prior to that, I had a hard time to figure that out. So this is a concept of called building in public. Like I didn't invent this idea of, doing something publicly and then documenting the results. But not many people had done it just like in a very raw way of openly and transparently sharing their income. And the great thing was when I thought about the cons of doing this, of like, oh, people would judge you or think that, you're stupid. I was like, cool, I don't really care what people think about me anyway. So maybe I'm the perfect person to do this. I'm not bothered by people judging me or leaving negative comments. I've never, it's just never been a part of my life. I don't really, it doesn't bother me that much. So I thought, you know what? Like, let me think about this. And that was what helped me decide that I wanted to pursue this idea of building in public, which is essentially taking a project and documenting your journey from start to finish and sharing it with the world. That's really all it is. People do it in many different ways, not just with money. They do it with building a software product or, quitting cigarettes or, whatever that thing is. And I took that concept and applied it to my situation. And what it did is exactly what you just mentioned is I knew that if I like announced this problem in my life to the world, that it would hold me accountable to fix it. Because if I came out and said, hey, I've created this scenario in my life and I'm going to be sharing my journey trying to crawl and climb my way out of it, and I'm going to share it with you. I knew that there was no way that I could just like, the following week just not follow up on that or mention it. And I, becoming like a solo person where there's no one else, there's nobody close in my life to hold me accountable, whether that's a romantic partner, like a close friend or a mentor or something that would hold me accountable. I knew it was a way that I could hold myself accountable when all else failed. And so that was why I decided to go that route and why I really leaned into this concept of building in public.
Okay, so I have a bunch more questions for you, and I want to make sure that we can try and get to as many of them as possible. And this is a reminder for you guys who are sitting in. If you're in the room, you have questions for Mike, just drop them in the chat, and we'll pick them up in a little bit. But okay, you've said that recurring income is unreliable. Like, tell us why it's unreliable.
Yeah. So especially, I think this is particularly applicable to like my age group. I think when I think about the time period of graduating high school, getting your first BlackBerry or smartphone or whatever, Sidekick, one of those phones, as social media has evolved, there's a pretty solid, like, I'd say 8-year period where we were inundated with this idea of like, oh, create an e-com store or a drop shipping store or, get into, right, fill in the blank, whatever it is. And you can just create passive income. And with the wide variety of experience that I've had over the past decade, you start to realize that that dream is not necessarily true. Now, absolutely, you can build a business that creates recurring income. You can find, things that you can invest into to create passive income. Totally possible. But the idea that we could start something, put some effort into it, and that it's going to pay you hundreds of thousands of dollars for the rest of your life without significant effort is ludicrous. There's hardly any like real examples that you can point to and say, oh, this person created this thing and it basically lasted for the majority of their lifetime and paid them forever and their kids forever, right? It's just, in my opinion, it's just not real. It just isn't. When I think about entrepreneurship, and especially when I think about the evolving marketplace today of being an entrepreneur, my approach is that most entrepreneurs are creative and we are meant to work on many different projects throughout our lifetime. And I think it's totally plausible that, you work on a thing, you work really hard on it, you build it up. It does create, a base of recurring revenue. And you work on that until you're bored with it, or you work on that until you're tired with it, and then sell the thing or start something else. And the idea that we, you know, go to trade school, get a career, and work from the age of 18 to 65 in one career path and then retire and get paid forever is just insane. I don't think that the traditional systems that are in place for, my grandparents are going to be reliable when I am their age. It's just, that's just my train of thought. So I'm always thinking about how can I build a portfolio of projects that are paying me in different ways, in diverse ways. And there's this common quote of, the average millionaire has seven sources of income. But what people fail to mention is that they didn't start that way. It's kind of crazy to think, oh, I'm going to start seven, five or seven different projects at one time and build them all at the same time. And then by the time I'm 50, 60, I'll be a multimillionaire and it'll pay me forever. Most, seven-figure earners started with one thing and put all of their effort into it and built up that base and then diversified and either sold their company or hired a CEO to sit in place or whatever that is. So income is always evolving and it's always different. It's always changing. And I think many of the shiny objects that are put in front of our face on the internet today are often exaggerated because people have an incentive to tell you that they're easy and they're not. And as somebody who is, I run a private community, I am a teacher and a mentor for many others. I don't sell courses. I don't like the idea of being seen as like a guru or some sort. But many people that I work with, I just tell them the truth. I say, this is hard and it's going to take a long time and it's not easy. And yes, most people fail at this, but like, and it's, maybe a silly analogy, but you think about like if your career is a rocket blasting off into space, right? When it's on the ground and it's taking off and you're trying to build a base of income and really find success, the beginning is always the slowest, right? A rocket uses the most fuel, the most energy, the most resources just to barely even get off the ground. And it's going the slowest that it'll ever go right when it's blasting off, but it's using the most energy, the most fuel. And making money is very, very similar. It takes the most time and effort and energy and resources in the beginning. But over time, right, as you get to, higher into the atmosphere and you bust through the ozone, well, now you're moving way faster, but you're actually using less resources, less fuel, less time and effort and energy. So that is totally possible. But of course, when you fully take your foot off the gas and, you don't put effort into it, it's highly unlikely that it's just going to keep on paying you and paying you and paying you. So that's kind of my thought when I think about like passive and recurring income. And I just think that it's not as realistic as many people think.
Right on. So, okay, so let me preface this by saying that like if we don't run over, we've got a little bit more than 10 minutes. So I want to make sure that we can kind of get to some of these other things. One of the big ideas that really struck me, and I think that this feels like a personal finance idea with business finance implications, is the and frankly, like you could say the same thing. You just replace finance with life, and it's sort of the same thing. But
Yeah.
the idea of taking on the uncomfortable thing you've been avoiding. So, can you speak to that for a second?
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, sorry for the long monologues, by the
Oh,
way.
all good.
So it comes back to this thing that I mentioned of like the obstacle is the way. And also with, I always thought that many of these problems were for future Mike to deal with, and this just isn't the case. So I really think it's a good practice to sit in silence and truly think for 30 minutes of like, what is the thing that I'm avoiding? What is the like asteroid headed for my life right now that I've been avoiding thinking about or that I know could possibly, just crush my life at any moment. And it's a good practice to have is to like think about these things. We don't want to be pessimists and we don't want to think negatively, but I wish I would have done that so much sooner and really think about like, wow, the tax man is going to come knocking any day now. I should really set aside a day or a week to just fully focus on this and understand where I'm at with things. And I'm fully aware that this sounds so basic and I'm I completely accept my naivety and like kind of being an idiot that got me into this situation. But I live by simplicity and I think it's a pretty simple but fundamental thing to consider what is like the huge obstacle that is next on my to-do list and what am I using to distract myself and to continue procrastinate dealing with this thing. And absolutely, it could be money, it could be finance, it could be debt, it could be taxes that you've been putting off. Like, I fully understand how difficult it is to be a business owner and to be obligated to pay these taxes. And, you miss a quarter and you're like, oh, I'll make up for this one. And then it happens again. And then the more it happens, the easier it is to just say, okay, well, I didn't take care of it this year, but next year I'll make up for this year. And it's a losing formula. It's never going to work. And I've paid the consequences for that and still am paying the consequences for that. And luckily, I've been able to turn it around, but it takes a massive amount of effort. So always think about that. Is it your health? Is it, do you know your health is catching up with you? Is it your relationship? Are you not acknowledging, the things that you've been neglecting in your relationship? And I think yeah, it should be a fundamental piece of what revolves around the center of our life is thinking, what is the thing that I'm avoiding? What is the obstacle? What is the mess? And I think if you acknowledge it and you deal with it, you'll often find that it's your advantage. And it's why I'm so adamant about just like being what I call radically transparent about these things, because I find a huge benefit to my life by doing that. Um, by just openly talking about all the things that nobody likes to talk about. It builds a lot of trust with people, and I find a huge benefit in my life from doing it.
So we'll get into tools and stuff in just a second, but I want to preface this next part by saying that you've laid out your process in a way where your business finances and your personal finances kind of work together in a sense, and like, or one trickles down into the other. And I assume that I mean, it probably happens for most people, but the way that you have set that up, I thought was pretty interesting. Let's first talk about specific to business and small business, like knowing your legitimate budget. So how did you what you had to get finite with that? How did you determine it?
Yes. So there's two different ways that I did it. Do you mind if I mention a separate tool?
Oh no, go right ahead. Yeah,
Okay.
so it's fair game.
So initially I used like a regular spreadsheet formula and I have all this stuff that I can share with you. Do you mind if I drop the link in the chat?
Sure.
It's a free
Yeah, go for it.
resource guide. I think you've actually seen it before, Kevin.
Yep.
Um, so here's a link to like everything I used. And there's no catch. Everything in there, like, I don't ask for anything. I'm not selling you anything. It's just truly just a free resource guide of everything that I used and trying to explain it, how I used it. So there's a spreadsheet that's in there It's just a Google spreadsheet with a formula. And I spent like 2 hours just going through all my bank accounts and just kind of plugging everything into that spreadsheet to figure out what was my, estimated average monthly expenses and annual expenses to really figure out what is that baseline number. And again, in the spirit of simplicity, that was where I started. Now, there is a way to sort of like shortcut that process, and this is mentioned in that resource guide, but it's a tool called Copilot. And that connected to all my bank accounts and just gave me an auto budget. It took all my historical spending and helped me understand like what were my average expenses in certain categories. So like food and beverage, for example, or dining or groceries or retail. And it just kind of auto did all that. Now, the problem with automating it for me was that my budgeting habits and my spending habits were not what I wanted in my life. I was trying to eliminate my spending habits. So it was giving me average budgets that were insane. So for example, I saw that like my average dining expense was like $2,300 a month in 2022 and 2023. So clearly, I did not want to keep that spending habit. So doing the auto budget thing was only so helpful. It helped me understand and identify where my bad spending habits were, but it didn't help me set a new budget. Whereas my doing it manually with a spreadsheet helped me figure out where my spending habits were. And yeah, so that was how I went about kind of doing like an autopsy of understanding what was I doing before? What do I need to change? What was I spending? Where is there waste? And what can I eliminate? And what should my budget look like based on my income that I was making heading into 2024?
Now that analysis has got to be really helpful, and then coupling that with some of the other things that you've used, feels like you have taken a holistic approach. I do want to make sure that we talk a little bit briefly about profit first and paying yourself. And
Yeah.
can you speak to that for a moment?
Very much so. So in 2019, I was, really busy, had a whole team, and they always took priority, which is great. But that meant that I was the last priority on the list of to-dos. And I had heard about Profit First. I had not really read it, but just kind of like heard about it in the sphere of being an influencer. I mean, sorry, an entrepreneur for quite some time. And I had same thing. I always thought, oh, that's the thing for future Mike to do is like sit down and read Profit First and implement that. And when this happened, I was like, okay, I really need to look into this. And it was kind of one of the first books that I read throughout this process. I love reading, I love learning, I love documentaries. So I sat down and I went through the process and I thought, okay, yeah, I really need to implement this in my life. And the sad truth of it is that after 2023, I started to realize, okay, I actually need to lay some people off and let some people go because I was like, this is terrible to say, but I was taking out loans to pay my staff. And that was I should have just been honest with them and told them like, yeah, the ship is sinking. But I didn't, because A, I had too much pride. I had my ego in it. And I was fearful of like, letting people down. But I was so far past letting them down and, just dragging it out was only creating further problems. So I needed a new way of thinking. I needed a new philosophy, a new methodology going into 2024. And Profit First was kind of the philosophy that I adopted.
Can you talk about that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Can you talk a little bit about on the personal finance side? So the way like there's this great graphic that you've got, and we won't show it here yet, but it's like basically looks like your business enterprise and your income sort of drips into a 50-30-20 arrangement. And you even talk a little bit about how you've taken that 50-30-20 and sort of adapted it to what your needs are. So can you speak to both like what 50-30-20 is for people in the personal finance sense, and then also like the flexibility that you might recommend in like sort of massaging it to our own needs?
Yes. So I have four like basic strong sources of income. And it is my marketing agency, it is my mentorship business, it is then what I call like my creator business. Um, and then I have my podcast content studio. So all those things contribute to my full income. And so it makes it a little bit tricky. And I don't mind sharing my sequence map. I'll do that here in a minute. But since I've got these sources of income, they kind of need to be divided based on what they are and how they generate income. And so first thing is first is that my main business, my marketing company, all goes through this profit first method. And that's the first thing that happens. So like my businesses are my income. They kind of live and breathe by the profit first method. Then that profit piece goes into like my personal income workflow. And the reality is, like, I have a strong income, but it's all accounted for, right? Like, all my money is going towards like taxes and debt and all these things and business expenses and whatever. So the reality is, I don't have a ton of like personal income. And the great thing is, like in some ways I don't need it, right? I've got a roof over my head, I have transportation, I'm able to buy groceries every week. And as long as I have that, I'm good. I don't need to buy surfboards and clothes and I've already got all that junk and luckily I've got that all out of my system. So that lets all my money flow into a workflow that is like paying off credit cards, paying my mortgage, paying off my debts, paying business expenses and all those things. So first rung on the ladder is profit first, then everything drips into what would be 50/30/20, but I've adjusted it to my needs, which is actually 60/30/10. So 60% is my needs, which is all my personal bills. So that would be internet bill, personal credit card bill, my mortgage, my car insurance, my dental insurance, whatever those things are. It's just like my needs, the things that have to be paid. Then I have my wants, which honestly half the time I just take that money and like put it into savings or whatever. I just don't waste that on anything. I've done everything I can to like eliminate bad habits and even though I love going out to dinner, I've tried to stop doing that and just wasting money where I don't need to, like trying to cut out retail therapy, trying to cut out just wasting money. I quit drinking about 7, almost 8 months ago now, so saved a lot of money from doing that. Thank you, Rustin. I appreciate it. So just like quit a lot of bad habits. And then the last piece is 10%, which is savings. And that's just always going into like, I call it my tattoo fund, but basically it's just a savings fund. I put it into M1 and just put it in a high yield savings account. And I also have 5% of my business income through the profit first method that's also contributed to that M1 savings account. So that's kind of the workflow. I'm definitely happy to share my screen and just kind of show what it looks like visually if anybody would like to see it.
Yeah,
Uh,
sure, let's do it.
yeah, so I'll just kind of just reiterate on these couple things really quick. So this is what mine looks like. I've seen some people and like theirs is pretty like awesome looking. So I'm always thinking like, man, I wish mine looked really cool. But this is what I got going on. So at the top, these are my income sources. See if I can zoom in a little bit, right? So these are my four main kind of income sources. Right. So I've got Stoked, which is my marketing agency. I've got my creator income, which is the money that I make from like social media and mentoring and my private community and stuff like that. I've got Vera House, which is the name of my podcast studio down the street. And then TE Group is like my affiliate marketing income. So all the money that I make from recommending softwares and recommending tools that I personally use. And what happens here is basically I have two main tax pods. So all of this kind of plays into, everything that comes into these four pods goes into kind of the profit first method. So first thing is taxes, right? So I've kind of segmented my taxes. So got my marketing agency, and then everything else is sort of like my creator business. So all three of these are kind of in the same kind of uh, squad or camp. So that tax money goes here, and then the tax money specifically for my primary business goes into a separate quarterly tax payment. Then it's broken down into 5% profit, 40% goes to the operating account, and then the rest goes into an owner's pay portal. So this is like what I consider my salary. Now, of course, it fluctuates, so it's not the same number. I don't pay myself a set salary. I get paid based on what's left after all of this happens. Um, and of course, profit first is about paying myself first. So you could also see it that way. But because of my business, I still kind of prioritize these things. But no matter what, there's money that goes into this owner's pay portal. Now, the difference is the money that comes into owner's pay, it still really isn't mine because it still has a lot of like, I still have a lot of liabilities that need to be taken care of. So even though it's in owner's pay and that's my quote unquote salary, that then gets divided again. And it goes 60% to needs, 30% to wants, 10% to savings. And when I think about wants, like these are, let's say, I get a haircut or, let's say I go to like a concert here locally or something. Like these are the little things that might be in this wants folder. Often whatever's in here is just to make sure that there's a little bit of money in my personal checking. I've almost like lived by this rule of like I don't want money in my personal checking account. Like as long as there's like 200 bucks in there, I'm good. Like I don't, like I don't even want to use this account. I buy groceries, that's it. I really try to just not spend money for the time being, and I've kind of accepted the fact that, yeah, if that's what I got to do for the next couple of years, I'm totally fine with that. All the other things that I need are taken care of. Um, and again, I'm in a pretty privileged situation to be able to say that, so I'm super grateful and happy that that's the case. But there's a lot going on here. So what happens here is on the right-hand side, these are basically like my credit cards. And it's a little bit it's like a little bit complicated to explain what these things are. But basically what's happening here is I've got my mortgage through Truist. I've got sorry, it's kind of glitching out for a second just because I'm doing so many things at once. But here we go. Is everybody following? So
Yep.
this is like 50/30/20, but I've adjusted it for my own life to 60/30/10. Um, and this works for me, so I've kind of like increased my needs because I'm not able to like just set aside as much savings. Like I really need, my bills and my debts and things to be paid. So whatever is in here, I'm using to pay off this small $5,000 loan, and I just contribute whatever's in here to my balances. So all these credit cards are on auto pay for minimum balance. And then what I've done is I've organized them from highest interest to lowest interest. And then anything that's left in here is an additional payment, and I'm just knocking these out one by one. So that's sort of my setup. So everything is profit first at the top. I've got a couple little extra things where I'm always like trying to set a little tiny bit of money aside that I just kind of in some ways forget about. Like I don't even want to remember that it's happening. So for example, it's sort of like this tattoo fund. What I do is any affiliate commissions I make, I just kind of send them off to the side. And then I've got a nice little, bundle of money where I'm like, okay, it's kind of like an oh shit fund. It's like, all right, I need a little bit of money. Like I've got this extra thing that's just kind of sitting over here. And if I was in a position to where, I had some extra money, then sure, this would be like, okay, maybe I'll go on a little weekend trip or maybe, and maybe, that is kind of like a little splurge account so that my life's not, quote unquote miserable or whatever, so I'm not just always just paying bills. But everything else is pretty much, it has something that it's accounted for. So needs are bills, wants are basically groceries and a haircut and something every now and then. And then savings is just whatever is kind of allocated left over to pay off some of these small things. Now, I have automations at the basically that I run bi-weekly so that things like profit and wants are being transferred. So like my profit is always pushing into this M1 account and this is my business. So I don't want to see this or even think about it because I just always want to be contributing to this savings account, even if it's like, 80 bucks, 200 bucks, like just small little transfers every now and then. So yeah, this is my approach. This is what my map looks like. And hopefully it's helpful. I don't know that it is, but I'm definitely happy to answer any questions or share any thoughts about it if anybody has any questions at all.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing that, Mike. And for those of you who maybe don't know M1, that's what you're using on the investment side in your high yield savings account, correct?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Well, listen, I feel like there's so much more that we didn't even get a chance to cut into that you've been great about sharing about. So maybe we'll figure something else out another time. But in the meantime, I want to make sure um, where can folks find you? What's the best way for people to touch base if they have further questions?
Yeah. So um, the short answer is just Google my name and you'll find my social media profiles and all that stuff. Whatever works for you. If you're a LinkedIn person, you'll find it. Instagram, I personally use Instagram all the time. That is like the primary place that I share my story, document the things that I'm trying to, figure out in my business. I also teach a lot of, content creation and just marketing in general, how to write newsletters, how to, be more consistent with content as a brand owner or a business owner or entrepreneur. So all of that stuff can be found under, my name. So at Mike Metzger. Um, Yeah, and that's pretty much it. I would love for anybody to join my newsletter. If you're not really a social media person, I'll drop a link to my newsletter if that's okay, Kevin.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just
And
send
we
out a
do.
newsletter, once a week and just kind of share, thoughts, tools, resources, strategies, approaches to building a brand and building, an audience around a product or service. So yeah, those are the best things of how people can interact with me or learn more or whatever. And any questions, anything I can do to help, I'm totally open to it.
Cool. So we do have one question, and Clifton, I'm going to paraphrase you a little bit, but he says, "Can you have you encountered a situation which the owners pay that 60% doesn't cover like what the basics are of that need? How do you handle that when that happens?"
Yeah, so I have had a couple like emergency moments, probably two times in the past year. And I really didn't know what to do because I'm like, I can't take out another loan. I can't, like, I just didn't know what to do. And my, I don't even know if this is allowed. So since this is yeah, I'll just tell you what I did. So I have a Stripe account, and Stripe has this thing called Stripe Capital. And I had there's two things that I've done. So I've taken Stripe Capital when I'm in a really, really tough situation. So basically, when you have historical revenue with Stripe, they'll say, hey, for a flat $500 fee, we'll give you 3 grand. And so I've been like, "Ah, man, I hate to like add to my interest and add to there's no interest, it's just a flat fee. Like as much as I hate to add to my debt, I'm just gonna do it. And I did that a couple times and it worked and it was fine, but it definitely wasn't ideal because then they're taking money from your revenue every time you make income. And it's like you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. And it got me out of the emergency, but it just dug the hole a little bit deeper. So that wasn't really helpful. Even worse, earlier on, what I would actually do is essentially bill myself as a customer. So like I would have money on my credit card, like a balance on my credit card, and I would charge myself as if I was a customer so that I could turn that credit into cash. And that was a really bad idea. So those were like two things that I did. The Stripe Capital thing is not bad, but I definitely wouldn't advise to do the credit card deal. I don't even know that I should admit that I did that, but those were like two things I've done in that moment. The other answer that's like a more tangible answer is sell everything you own. Um, it might sound drastic, but I think that we have more stuff than we think we do. Like especially if you live in the US and I had so many things that other people would probably find valuable that I could get rid of. And, the extreme example would be I sold my car. I love fast things and I love adrenaline and I love sports cars. And, I mentioned earlier, I love Formula One. So this probably, I don't know if this is applicable to anybody, but, I made the very, very difficult decision to like sell my car, which I loved, $130,000 sports car. And I was like, I'm going to sell it. And I sold it and I bought a little Toyota FJ Cruiser. It was 15 grand and I love it. And I almost love it more than my sports car. So, make sacrifices and just do the hard thing. If you put yourself in a better situation, you can buy those things again later. Like you can buy a jet ski in 5 years. Who cares? Like just sell the thing. So I've really done that of just like letting go material possession of things that I thought I cared about. I had a full-blown like racing simulator in my house. Again, loved it. I decided to like part it out and sell it. But even little things, I had extra like bicycle helmets laying around, clothes that I didn't wear, furniture that I didn't use that was just in my basement. And it doesn't seem like much at the time, but $20 by $20, it adds up and you start to chip away at things. So I've tried to like trade the bad habits for good habits, which is I have stuff. I'm not using it. I can replace it later. And I think a big part of that is being optimistic about the future. By making the short-term sacrifice now, you can always, rebuy the fun toys and tools and whatever later, a couple of years down the road. And so I've just come to terms with that. And I've fully accepted that I'm in a period where I have to make sacrifice. I have to work a little harder than I would like to. And I've got to spend more money on bills than I do on myself. And I've just Yeah, I'll come to terms with that, and that's what I would recommend in that situation when you feel like you know that you're in a month where you don't have the income to pay things. Just kind of accept it for what it is, lean into it, and be optimistic about it. And you might have to sell some things that you like, whether it's books on the shelf, whether it's furniture in the basement, whatever those things are, an Apple Watch, just sell it. You can buy it again later.
I would also just add as a sort of ancillary note that one of the things that I've noticed is that like we get a lot of times, and you mentioned this in your sports car analogy, like we can get by on a lot less than we think we can, and it like frankly your mind manages to like adapt pretty quickly. And so the other thing I would say is like I wonder about like that's also can be what those emergency funds or like that slush fund is there for if you need it. But Mike, lots of really actionable advice today. Thank you for sharing your story with us. I feel like we could go on, but I want to give everybody their day back. I will send for all of you guys that RSVP'd, I will send around the recording as soon as it compiles. And then if you have any questions or we can be helpful, just reach out anytime. And Mike, again, thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks everybody for tuning in. I'm grateful for all of you, and thanks for listening to my story. I hope you found it helpful, and yeah, hope everybody has a killer rest of their week.
Amazing. Now, y'all go succeed.